Welcome to week 4 of the 6 months to SOC challenge. A user just reported a suspicious email. It's got urgency language, sketchy links, and attachments. Is it phishing? Today I'm going to be walking you through how I'd investigate this step by step with the standard operating procedure I built. We're going to collect artifacts, verify the sender, check the URL against reputation tools, analyze the attachment, make a verdict, and document everything. The best part about this analysis is I'm going to be doing it on a real phishing email with real malicious links and attachments. I'm going to be doing this all on a virtual isolated machine, making sure not to run anything or click anything. Never forget that when you're actually analyzing a real phishing email. Now let's go ahead and see how this workflow handles actual threats. Let's get into it. All right, so to start our investigation, we're going to be using our standard operating procedure that I actually built studying for the Blue Team Level 1 certification. I built this so that I can have a step-by-step breakdown on how I'm going to investigate phishing emails every single time so I don't miss a beat and I make sure to do everything thoroughly. So we're just going to give a quick overview of it here. First things first, we need to get the purpose and the scope, and this essentially covers all phishing, and then we're keeping that guilty until proven innocent mentality, because assuming all suspicious emails are malicious until analysis proves otherwise. Just doing this really never lets me put my guard down. So next up, safety requirements. We just need to make sure that we're always analyzing phishing emails on a VM or a dirty machine, disconnected from the internet, whenever useful or possible, especially if we're not in a sandboxed environment. We're never going to click any hyperlinks directly or enable any macros inside documents to avoid things like maldocs. Use text editors to extract artifacts as well, so things can be quicker, easier, and overall just more blunt and specific on what we're getting. So first phase is the initial triage, where we just check for initial red flags to make sure that we don't need to go too deeply in it, especially if a lot of these boxes are checked. We know that it's a phishing email already, and we can probably conclude that it's phishing. But phase 2 is artifact collecting email artifacts, web artifacts, file artifacts, all the good stuff to determine whether or not an email is malicious. And then the next phase is the artifact analysis, looking into these artifacts to figure out whether or not they are the email itself is phishing or malicious. So we have things like sender verification, verifying the IP address, things of that nature. And then the next phase we move on to is determining whether or not an email is malicious, just based off of the red flags, based off of the artifact analysis and things of that nature. And then afterwards, if it's malicious, we go ahead and implement our defense actions. And lastly, we get on to report writing, where we create our report so that we can always create like a universal report template that has everything we need, and we could get it done the right way every single time. And then it'll just essentially have all the artifacts we have, things of that nature. And we will show an example of running through the standard operating procedure now, investigating that phishing email that we got. The first thing the standard operating procedure outlines is to first look for low-hanging fruit that can tip you off right away whether or not the phishing email is actually malicious. So the first thing we're going to be looking at is the subject line. So right away, we see that they're already giving urgency language. Urgent, due invoice payment, wire transfer document, action required immediately. It already seems a little suspicious because right in the subject, it's telling us that we need to do something immediately. We need to transfer some sort of invoice payment. Who knows what's going on? But we already know that whoever sent this email wants this to be done right away. That already checks the first box if the subject line is suspicious. Next, we're going to be looking at the from address or the from header to see whether or not that looks odd or suspicious in any way as well. So we're looking here, we see this Paolo Reggiani or Reggiani, that's the from, and the PAOL.Reggiani at mos.it. Yeah, at mos.it. And I already know this domain doesn't look familiar to me. I've never seen it before, so that already is throwing red flags. This doesn't even match the full name of Paulo, but sometimes companies do shorten the name, so That's not super duper suspicious, but already not recognizing this domain definitely is a big red flag already for me. So that's a second box checked on the red flags list. Next, we're looking for a generic greeting, which we can see right away. Dear valued customer already has that generic greeting. It's not addressing the user by their name. It's not addressing anyone by their specific company. It's just saying, dear valued customer, which could be used universally for anyone. That is a third tip that tips us off that this email is probably phishing. Next, we're looking for urgency language in the body of the email. So let's go ahead and read through this. Urgent action required. Payment verification needed immediately. Dear valued customer, as we can see, we already have the urgency in the body here. Dear valued customer, please find the attached transfer slip from our bank and confirm receipt of the payment to your account. Following the trail mail below, our client requested from us to remit payment to your account for business you did with them. Based on my telephonic conversation with your colleague, this is not how you spell colleague, kindly reconfirm that your bank details on the wire slip is correct. Important, to verify your payment status and confirm receipt, you must click the secure link below within 24 hours or your payment will be reversed. Verify payment now. We get this suspicious looking link. Alternatively, copy and paste this link and I await your kind reply and feedback. Received with thanks, regards, Digenia. This received is also spelled wrong, and we have lots of urgency language here inside of the email, so this already does tell me there is definitely urgency inside the body. Not only that, we saw two mistyped or two grammar errors, received is spelled wrong, as well as colleague is spelled wrong, which checks another box. And lastly, we see a suspicious link here that seems to have nothing to do with this mos.it domain. That is already another tip that tells me this email is probably suspicious. Let's go ahead and look at the attachments in the email. So we see this quotation.iso file right down here, and quotation.iso is another very weird thing coming from this email. Quotation.iso is a ISO file, and that typically has nothing to do with some sort of payment slip or some sort of document that it seems like they're claiming to have in that file, because ISO files are actually images. And that is actually a common way attackers bypass email security filters, sending ISO files so that they can get malicious files into companies' networks and email servers. And one last thing I didn't point out here was that we see the sender seems to be Paulo, but they sign it as Digenia. That's really weird because Paulo would probably sign the email as Paulo and not Digenia. I'm pretty much 100% sure that this email is a phishing email, but let's go ahead and look deeper into the .eml file of this email and see if we can find even more indicators that this email is a phishing email, continuing to follow that standard operating procedure we outlined from the Blue Team Level 1 study. Following the standard operating procedure, the next phase of our investigation is collecting artifacts. So the first thing we're going to collect here is the from address, and we're using Sublime Text right now, which is a free text editor that allows you to really get deeper and look into these .eml files a lot more surgically. So first I'm using Control F to find from, and then we're going to be getting instances of from here. And then we see the from header is right here. And this is from that Paulo Reggiani. So we're going to go here and then save that here. And I'm just going to go from address, then put that right here. There we go. All right. Next up, we're going to get the subject line. And then we can do the same thing here, Control F subject, but we see it right here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that and get that down here. Next, we're going to go ahead and collect the reply to address using Control F. We already have reply here, and it seems like there's only one match for reply, and this was inside of the body. So we know that that reply to header doesn't actually exist inside of this email. And so that just tells us that it's going to bounce back to the from header, which is actually less common in phishing emails. And one good red flag to note down is if you see a reply to header that differs from the from header, a lot of the times it could be malicious. At least it makes you suspicious. Next, we're going to go ahead and grab the date that the email was sent. Just going to go ahead and search that. And then we see this was the 14th of January, 2020. And to be honest, I can just put these headers here just like that. All right, perfect. Next, we're going to look for the sender's IP. We're going to collect that artifact typically with the X sender IP header, but it doesn't seem like we're finding that X sender IP header. Yeah, I don't think it's in here. So we're going to go ahead and look at the received header, and then we see that it's coming from this IP address here. So we can just go ahead and grab that whole received header here. And then write that down as well. Now, lastly, let's go ahead and get that message ID so we could have the unique identifier for this email address. So we're just going to search up message ID, and it's right over here. And then just copy that. Then we're going to paste that here. Now let's go ahead and collect the web artifacts on the page. So what I like to do is just type in HTTP so we can see all instances of the HTTP string inside of the email. And we know this one is just essentially defining how to interpret the code on the page. So this isn't actually inherently malicious. So next up here, this isn't actually a link. So let's go ahead and find the next instance. And here is that link that we were seeing inside of the email that was specifying for us to click on it. So we're going to go ahead and just grab this whole anchor tag here is along with the link. And then that will just show the instance. And we're going to grab that link. And then it's always a good practice to defang it, which essentially won't make it clickable when you are documenting it. So good, now we got the web artifacts and we're going to move on to the file analysis. Now let's go ahead and do some file artifact collection. So we're going to first look for the X attached header, and that will essentially just tell us all the files that are attached to the email. And we have that quotation.iso. So we're going to get that down here and go ahead and type in attachments. And that's essentially just going to have us get that attachment name down. And next thing, we're going to go ahead and get the hash of that attachment. To get the hash, I went ahead and downloaded that file so that we can use a couple commands here in PowerShell and Linux to see it easily and quickly. Don't forget to never download or especially run any malicious files or suspected malicious files on a personal or work computer. Only do it on an isolated sandboxed VM where you know that nothing bad could happen if an attacker were to somehow get control of the machine. Now, first to demonstrate this in PowerShell. We're actually in PowerShell right now, even though we're on a Linux operating system. If you just run the pwsh command, you're actually able to go ahead and use PowerShell. So if you're on Windows, you can go ahead and do the same exact thing here in PowerShell. And we just use the get file hash command. And then you would go ahead and put the name of the file that you want to look at, quotation.iso, and then it automatically gives you that SHA-256 hash. And then to do that here in Linux, you would go ahead and use the SHA-256 sum command. And then same thing here, you would go ahead and run the file name, and then here's that hash. You can see they're the exact same both sides, but a lot of times we actually submit MD5 hashes when we're using reputation checks. So to do that here, we're actually here in PowerShell first, we're going to use this dash algorithm flag, and then we're going to go MD5 and then quotation.iso, and there's the MD5 hash. And then for Linux, we're going to go MD5 sum, and then we're going to go here with that same file name here. And then here you go. And now we get both of the hashes that we can go ahead and submit and use for reputation checks and documenting. Now that we've collected all the artifacts that we needed, from the email artifacts, the web artifacts, and the file artifacts, we can go ahead and move on to the next phase of that standard operating procedure, which is going to be sender verification. First, let's go ahead and check that SPF and authorization headers to see whether or not the checks actually went through and verified that the people sending emails on this domain are actually the real legitimate people. So we're going to just type in authorized. Oh, no, or authentication, sorry. And there it is, popped up right over here. DMARC, no DMARC. SPF came up as fail, and there's no DKIM or DMARC for that domain. So we already know for a fact that this is 120% phishing. If not, something had to go wrong on their end for the SPF to fail. But with all the other red flags, we know that this is probably most definitely phishing. But let's continue analyzing and go ahead and document this so that we have this down in our phishing report. We went ahead and grabbed that IP address so we could do some sender verification on the people who sent the email. Using the MX Toolbox tool, we went ahead and did a reverse IP lookup to see if it resolved to any domain names that were associated with that mos.it domain. And here you can see that it found no DNS records even published for that sending server. So that right away tells me that number one, it's not associated with the mos.it domain. And number two, if there's no DNS records published, that tells me more than enough about how credible or how legitimate this sending server is. Even though we know that nothing resolved when we try to do a reverse lookup on the sending server's domain, we still want to look at the sending domain that the attacker tried to impersonate, that mos.it address. I looked it up online and couldn't find any legitimate banks or legitimate organizations taking on that domain name or name for themselves, which was suspicious enough, and I decided to go ahead and do a whois query on that root domain. And we didn't really get much information back here, so that also tells me that either this attacker compromised this domain and is using it to send emails on their behalf, or, which I'm assuming most likely, is he just took something, spoofed it, and said that this is where it was from. Now we're going to go ahead and use one of my favorite tools for phishing analysis, VirusTotal. It has many security vendors that gives you reputation checks on suspicious and malicious URLs, file attachments, hashes, and IP addresses. It's great to make sure and check that the artifact that you're analyzing is actually malicious, and we're going to go ahead and use it now to demonstrate just that. We got this URL here, and then we have to unfang it. And then we're going to go ahead and submit that and see what comes back here. And we found that 12 out of 98 security vendors have already flagged this domain as malicious. So we can go ahead and document and write that down and move on to the next artifact. Before we go ahead and move on, I like to use other tools to get more information on these artifacts, especially if you're unsure. In this case, we are sure that this is a phishing email, but it's good to learn some of these other tools. So we use URLScan to get a live screenshot of this and see some of the HTTP requests that went on as well when we went ahead and did that. So URLScan didn't give a verdict, so this could be a little new, and this just shows exactly why you shouldn't rely on one tool, because if you did, you could have just seen this no classification and assumed that that URL wasn't malicious, even though we saw from VirusTotal a little earlier that it was. We also see this screenshot here that we could put inside of our report that says, sorry, you have been blocked, you're unable to access this, and this must have been taken down because of the fact that this was a phishing link. So that also tells us that this was a phishing email. So now we can go ahead and grab that screenshot and run it back to our report to include that in here, and honestly just take a full screen screenshot so that they can see that we ran this URL scan. Now that we've determined that the URL was malicious, let's go ahead and check that file inside the email and see whether or not, with a few reputation checks, if this file is known bad and known malicious by other security vendors. So we could go ahead and upload our file right from our computer, but keep in mind that this could be a real invoice. We know it's definitely not an invoice at this point, but we don't want to upload this file just in case that it is, because a community will be able to see that info that you're uploading. So we're going to go ahead and go to the search tab and just input that MD5 hash that we had, because that will directly reference that document. And this was flagged by a lot of vendors, 40 out of 62, a -11 community score, and it actually knows the name of our ISO image, quotation.iso, just with the hash there. And this is a popular threat label, and we can go ahead and get a screenshot of this to include into our report and get down that VirusTotal that flagged this as malicious. So we are 200, 400, 500% sure at this point. So let's go ahead and move on to the next security, the next reputation checker to cross-reference this information here. This Talos File Reputation Checker by Cisco will allow us to cross-reference that file to make sure that it is known bad and malicious. So I'm going to do this I'm not a robot real quick here. And then here it goes. It told us right away that this is malicious, and it gave us a lot of detection aliases for it. And we can go ahead and get a screenshot of this as well and put that into our report. Now we've gathered enough evidence to make our final verdict and start to build our report. So I cleaned up a little bit of our collection here, and I went ahead and wrote down a lot of the key indicators we got to determine why this email is malicious. So with the SPF failure, DKIM and DMARC not being configured, the sender name having that weird typo from Paulo to Paul alone, and then the generic greeting, the multiple spelling errors in the body, the extreme urgency in the body and in the subject, the suspicious URL that was flagged malicious by VirusTotal, the malicious attachment that was detected as malware by Cisco Talos and VirusTotal, the name mismatch from the Paulo Reggiani to Digenia. Based off all of this, like I said a second ago, this is very malicious. I can spell. There we go. I believe that's how you spell malicious. Either way, this is definitely malicious, so we're going to go ahead and build that report, and I will be right back. All right, following that standard operating procedure, we went ahead and built that phishing report, including our executive summary, the verdict, the artifacts we collected, the analysis we done on the artifacts, and our overall just complete picture of what this was and why the user submitted it and why I determined it as phishing. So to go through it, the executive summary, this was a information gathering and malware delivery email impersonating a financial payment notification. And then the sender verification failed SPF, and the URL and file attachments were confirmed malicious by VirusTotal and Cisco Talos Intelligence. So the verdict was malicious, as I said earlier, and we got all these artifacts that we know we collected from earlier. It's also showing all the analysis we performed, saying that SPF failed, there was no DKIM or DMARC records, and then also we have the URL reputation check that we got from VirusTotal and the screenshot from URLScan as well, just to show what happens when you navigate the site, which we know that it was down and was not able to be navigated anymore, probably because it was taken down because it was a phishing site, as well as the URLScan full page. And then we are also showing the file reputation checks we did on that malicious attachment that was on there from Talos Reputation, from the Talos Intelligence and the VirusTotal. Also just showing the score on there. There was no score for the Cisco one, but that's okay because it already told us that it was malicious. And then we put that verdict back down, put down the defensive actions we would take by blocking the sender domain so we can't get any emails from that domain anymore because we know it's either compromised or created by that attacker. We don't need those emails coming into our network. We added the URL to the block list so nobody can navigate to that email in case it finds its way back into our network. And then we added the file hash to the block list so that things like the EDRs won't allow workstations to download any email with that malicious hash. And then we search the email gateway for any similar emails, things like the subject line, things like that quotation.iso attachment, things like emails from that same domain or emails from that sending IP address, and made sure that we got rid of anything there and made sure nothing else was affecting or being sent to our domain from this malicious attacker. We notified the affected users and submitted the IOCs to threat intelligence platforms like PhishTank. And then we put down our name and typically the date. And then that is how we build a phishing report based off of the analysis that we did. And just like that, we determined that a phishing email was malicious, and we can go ahead and get the full breakdown in PDF to that SOP if you would like to download it. It's going to be on my website btoughsecurity.com, and we can go ahead and finish out the video. Now that's the full workflow. We triaged the email, collected artifacts, verified the sending server, checked reputations, and analyzed the malware attachment. With all the information we got back, we made a verdict and documented everything, all with the standard operating procedure I built. If this walkthrough was helpful, go ahead and hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you're new. Turn on post notifications so you don't miss the next one, and continue watching as we build our journey to becoming a SOC analyst within 6 months. Join the Discord if you want to connect with people on the same journey. Link's going to be in the description, as well as the full blog post and the standard operating procedure I demonstrated in this video are both going to be on my personal website, btoughsecurity.com. Drop a comment down below of maybe some other cybersecurity content you want to see on this channel. I'm thinking about starting a couple other series here, so I'd love to hear your feedback down below. I'll see you in the next one, and don't forget to be tough.